Welcome to the Bible Divas podcast, where women biblical scholars bring the academy to your earbuds. On today's pod, you've got double Hebrew Bible profs. You got me, Cynthia Schaefer-Elliott, and you have our very own Anna Siegels-Beal.
And today we are joined by the one and only Susan Ackerman. If you know, you know, she is the best. In our conversation with Susan, we'll talk about studying the women of the Hebrew Bible and ancient Israel, their life cycles, and ancient Israelite religions.
If you don't know who Susan is, she is the Preston H. Kelsey Professor of Religion, Emerita at Dartmouth, where she taught for over 30 years. She has served on the boards of the W.F. Albright Institute of Archaeological Research in Jerusalem and the American Society of Overseas Research, including a 6-year term as its president. She also served as president of the New England and Eastern Canada region of the Society of Biblical Literature. Now, on a personal note, Susan has made a profound impact on me and my own research, so I've just been pretty excited about the chance to talk with her. So, due warning, I get really excited in this one.
As you should. She is iconic. But we hope you enjoy this conversation with Susan Ackerman. And if you do, don't forget to subscribe, like, rate us, do all of that stuff. And you can find us on all of the socials too.
Welcome to Bible Divas, a podcast from Baptist News Global, where 4 women Bible scholars bring curiosity, expertise, and a healthy dose of sass to conversations about Scripture. Whether you're certain, skeptical, deconstructing, reconstructing, or just curious, pull up a chair. The Bible Divas challenge assumptions, explore new perspectives, share a few laughs, and discover why this ancient book still matters today.
We're so excited to have the one and only Susan Ackerman. Thank you so much, Susan, for being here.
Well, it's my pleasure to be here. There are 2 other Susan Ackerman professors out there in the world, I can tell you. I've learned during my career, so I'm not the one and only.
Well, you're the one and like only for us.
and there's one who's a religionist, actually, who does Malaysia. I sometimes get emails asking me questions about Malaysian religion.
Oh, really?
Yes, I have to just profess complete ignorance.
That is so cool, though. I love that.
That is so great. Well, we just, wanted to take the time to introduce you to some people who are interested in learning more about female biblical scholarship and to celebrate you and your work. But I think, Anna's going to start off with her first question.
I will. We are really interested in hearing what got you into biblical studies to begin with.
So I think probably like many people, it was a complete and total accident. I grew up in Arkansas, so maybe not the buckle of the Bible Belt, but definitely in Bible Belt country. But I grew up in a very non-religious family. So when I was growing up, the only things I knew about the Bible were either my father saying it was poppycock or classmates at school who would say things like, and I literally remember being told this when I was in the 8th grade, that God created the world in 6 days and on the 7th day created the fossils to test our faith. So those were basically the 2 things I knew about the Bible. Either it was choice A or choice B. And then I went to college, and I actually went as an undergraduate to Dartmouth, where I taught for almost all of my career in a kind of wild coincidence. And I was very lucky when I showed up at Dartmouth that I came, and this quite improbably, I came out of public schools in Arkansas, which at the time were rated 49th in the country. In Arkansas, we always used to say, thank God for Mississippi, because they were 50th. I came out of Arkansas public schools, not very good schools at all, but I came into Dartmouth very surprisingly with a lot of advanced credit and especially credit in courses that first year students normally take. First year calculus, first year English, first year biology, first year foreign language. And frankly, my advisor didn't know what to do with me. And so my advisor said, and I thought at the time, I thought this is just such a lame answer. Now I tell it to students all the time. But my advisor said, liberal arts are for exploring. You should take courses in something you know nothing about.
Nice.
And I decided, given how I had grown up, that one of the things I knew nothing about was religion. Now, I also knew nothing about quantum physics. I knew nothing about molecular biology, but religion is what I decided I knew nothing about. And so I took Dartmouth's introductory religion course. And it was a survey course, so there was Hinduism, there was Buddhism, there was all that, but there was a pretty significant chunk of Bible. And I was just blown away because it wasn't the Bible is poppycock. There was a professor who was standing in front of the room talking about the Bible who took it seriously as a way of thinking about people's religious beliefs and a way of thinking especially about the religion of the people who originally generated the Bible in ancient Israel. So he didn't think about it as poppycock, but he also didn't think about it as we have to read it in a so strictly literalistic way that God created the world in 6 days and on the seventh day created the fossils to test our faith. And that kind of in-between position about thinking about the Bible as a document that was a way into seeing a religious culture that actually had a very complicated system of theology and beliefs, not I kind of wrote, made the fossils to test our faith. I just blew my mind. I just thought it was the most amazing thing in the world that there was this other way of thinking about the Bible that wasn't those two diametrically opposed alternatives I had known for my entire life up until that point.
Wow.
And so I took some more courses, and then I took some more courses. And you do that for long enough, and you're a religion major. And then if you really do that for long enough, you have a master's in Old Testament, and you really do that for long enough, you have a PhD in biblical history and Semitic philology, which is the technical title of my PhD.
Wow.
That is a great title for a PhD, by the way. Will you, just for our listeners, what is philology?
So philology is languages, or broadly speaking, it's languages. So I did my PhD at Harvard in the Department of Near Eastern Languages and Civilizations. And then my subspecialty in the department was biblical history and Semitic philology. So the biblical history was the Near Eastern civilizations part of that, and the Semitic philology was the Near Eastern languages part of that. So we did Hebrew, we did Aramaic, we did Ugaritic, we did Akkadian, we did Semitic epigraphy, so texts that were written in Moabite, Edomite, Ammonite, all of that in the broader interest of studying Semitic philology.
So what made you then narrow your focus? Because I'm jumping the gun here, sorry, but I'm wondering. So you ended up doing a lot of writing on women and Israelite religion and women. What made you focus on that area?
Well, again, I think it probably goes back to my undergraduate education. I guess since I taught at Dartmouth for 34 years, I should toot Dartmouth's horn a little bit. But I was a religion major at Dartmouth. So my interest in the Bible was always going to be in ancient Israel's religious life. I'm not nearly as interested in the political history of ancient Israel. I'm not nearly as interested in the economics of ancient Israelite society. My interest was always going to be religion because my undergraduate major was in religion, and that's what I was most interested in. Dartmouth, at the time I was an undergraduate in the late 1970s, is also a school that had only very recently become coeducational. And so, for example, my graduating class was 750 men and 250 women. So it felt very much like an all-male school, and there wasn't much space at Dartmouth beyond that all-maleness. But one space that did emerge during my junior year was a women's studies program that offered a minor in what was then called women's studies. Now that program is called women's gender and sexuality studies, but it still exists. So it was a place different than the rest of Dartmouth, and it was a place where I found myself very happily at home. So I graduated not just with a major in religion, but with a minor in women's studies. And so you bring that to the table when you start graduate school. That's probably inevitably where I was going to go, and it's where I did go.
We're so glad you did.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of, the many, many books that you've written and the articles and the different contributions that you've made, I'm going to, and we'll talk a little bit more about some of your other books, but I want to highlight your book that recently came out just this past October 25, Maturity, Marriage, Motherhood, Mortality, Women, and Life Cycle Rituals in Ancient Israel. And you talk about women's liminality in different stages of life. I'm wondering if maybe you could explain to our listeners what you mean by liminality and how that concept helps us better understand women's experiences in ancient Israel.
Mm-hmm. So liminality is a word that came into the scholarly lexicon in 1909. We can pinpoint it pretty exactly through the work of a French ethnographer named Arnold van Gennep. And Van Gennep published a book in French in 1909 called Le Rite de Passage, or Rites of Passage. And Van Gennep's interest in that book was tracing these various rituals or rites across cultures. He's not a biblical scholar or even a scholar of the ancient Near East, but across many, many cultures, tracing these various rituals or rites that pass, therefore they're rites of passage, that pass an individual from one stage in life to another. A wedding is a rite of passage that passes one from being single to being married. I often say to my students, graduation is a rite of passage that passes you from the stage of being a student to the stage of being an alumna or an alumnus. Funerals are rites of passage that pass one from the stage of being living to being dead. So these are common features across cultures, and Van Gennep sought to describe not just these features across cultures, but what he thought were their commonalities across cultures. And their commonalities, as he saw it, were that they all had a basic three-part structure, that you started in stage one. Let's say you're a student. You're separated from that stage at the beginning of the rite of passage. As graduation begins, let's say, you're not a student in the sense, I can't give you exams anymore, right? I can't stop the whole ceremony and say, wait, you have to write one more paper, or we need to do this one more thing, or I want to change this one grade. That's over. That's over. But until the very end of the ceremony, really when you throw your hats up in the air and all that kind of thing, you're not a graduate yet either. And so you haven't transitioned to that new stage where, in Van Gennep's language, you're reincorporated back into a new identity, now the identity of alumnus. In the middle, during the ceremony, you're betwixt and between stages, to use a very famous phrase that's often used about that middle phase, or what Van Gennep called it was liminal, from the Latin word limen, which means threshold. You're on a threshold, as in the threshold of a door. You're not really still out there on the front porch anymore, but you're not in the entry hall either. You're on the threshold, the limen, you're in that liminal phase. And that's what's meant by liminality, is to be in this betwixt and between stage. Van Gennep thought of it very much in terms of these rituals like graduation or weddings, but you can also think of liminality as being much more of an extended phase. So, for example, you might think of the entire 4 years a student is at college, and especially at a university like mine, where our students are almost all 18 to 21 years old. You might think of that whole 4 years as a liminal phase. They're not really children anymore. They've left home. Their parents are sort of out of the picture. Often we wish they were more out of the picture.
For sure. I agree.
Not quite as helicopter parents, but that's a different problem. But they've left home. They're not really children anymore, but they're not really adults in the sense of what adults do in our society. They're not working. They don't have a job. They don't have a career. They're betwixt and between those two identities of child and adult. And that's a long 4-year liminal period that then really climaxes with that ultimate rite of passage at graduation.
Wow, great. So I'm thinking about, kind of more on the social side of things. Well, I'll get to that part in just a second, but maybe you can give us an example from your book about how that liminality changes the way we understand maybe a familiar biblical passage about women, since your book is on women and their life cycles. Is there a concrete example you can give us?
Sure, I'll give you an example that actually is a biblical phrase that doesn't include women. Because I said death can be a rite of passage, right?
Right.
So when we think about, and funerals can be the ritual that marks that transition from being alive to being dead. When we think about what we know about funerals and burial in ancient Israel, and what we know best are funerals and burials from a period of, let's say, roughly 800 to 600 BCE, and we know them best from the southern part of ancient Israel, the kingdom of Judah. And what we know about those burials is that a very typical burial practice was to bury people in limestone caves, either naturally occurring limestone caves, or sometimes, because limestone is a very soft stone to work, artificially made caves that are hewn into a hillside. And those caves, when they're hewn, either natural caves or artificial caves, are sculpted in such a way that around the perimeter of the cave, there's a U-shaped set of 3 benches, if that makes sense. Bench 1, bench 2 are the sides of the U, and bench 3 is the base of the U. And when someone dies, you lie a body on that bench. But that's not the end of burial in ancient Israel, because these tombs, these cave tombs, are used over multiple generations. And so you've only got 3 benches. So once a body completely decomposes and comes down, when it's initially put in the cave, it's still a very fresh body with skin on it and flesh and hair and all that kind of thing. But once it completely decomposes till it's just a skeleton, what happens is the bones of that body are then taken, put in a repository elsewhere in the cave with all the other bones that have been put there in over the generations. And that's the phrase we know from the Bible as you are gathered to your fathers, right? That's literally what's happening. The bones of the deceased person are being gathered together with the bones of the ancestors who have come before. But notice the phrase, gathered to the fathers. Now, this doesn't mean women weren't buried, but somehow in that secondary stage, when you move into that final status of joining the community of the ancestors, women aren't ancestors. And so when you think about what many people think of as some of the most boring passages in the Bible, that all of a sudden explains for us why X male begat 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 X male, where the women never show up because only men are ancestors. You're only men because you're gathered to your fathers.
Because you're gathered to your fathers. Wow.
Right.
That's a great example.
And I guess I
that.
should have said that phase in between when you're originally laid on the bench to the phase when your body finally desiccates and you're gathered to the fathers. That's the liminal phase, right? You're between the status of having died, but the final status of having become an ancestor.
Right. Wow. So that as I was reading some of your book the other day, and I made some notes because I knew I was going to be talking to you. So I was like, oh, I'll just ask her about this. You talk about the social element of, so we have all these different life cycles, and you argue in your book that you've got menopause, but you also have social menopause. You have puberty, but you have social puberty. And I really loved the distinction that you were making between just, that life cycle event, but then the social element of that. Would you mind expanding upon that a little bit for us?
Sure. And again, I should say, at least conceptually, much of this is I stole. They're footnotes. I didn't steal it.
You're citing Google.
Great
That's fine.
footnotes.
But
It's all there.
I am not the originator of these ideas. So many, especially anthropologists, have explored these ideas of especially social birth and social puberty. So, for example, for social birth, one of the things we know for ancient Rome is that biological birth actually, it happens exactly when we think it would happen. A mother gives birth. She goes into labor. She delivers a child. That's biological birth. But the child is not made a member of the family until the 8th day after birth. And that's really the child's social birth, so much so that, according to Roman authors, the child in that intervening 8 days is more a plant than an animal, right? Not the kind of breathing, moving, living being we would think of, because the social birth that happens on the 8th day, which is when the child happens to get its name, that hasn't happened yet. You can find the same traditions with social puberty. So, for example, in rabbinic tradition, a boy, and we still see this carried out in Judaism today, a boy is considered to have become pubescent and even to have become a man at age 13. That's what's marked today by the ritual of a bar mitzvah, right? Even if he has only one pubic hair. The Talmud says this. So perhaps one of its slightly racier parts.
Maybe that could be the part we use as our clip on the socials.
Yes, that would be great.
But clearly that boy with one pubic hair is not biologically yet an adult male, right? He has not gone through full-fledged puberty in a way that will make him a biological male capable of reproduction. But he's considered a man in the category of social puberty. Right. So the category I was interested in, and this is my contribution, is to think about social menopause.
Yes.
So we know what biological menopause is. It's when a woman ceases to menstruate and so no longer can be a childbearer. But there are certain women in the ancient world who are, by definition, going to come to a point in their life where they're no longer a childbearer, even if they're still menstruating. And for me, one of the examples that I used as a kind of the most parade example is a queen married to a king. So when her husband dies, her son becomes king, but she's not going to be allowed to remarry because the danger is if she remarries, she'll have a child that will threaten the son who has become king for the throne. So she is, by definition, going to be no longer a childbearer for the rest of her life. So even if she is still menstruating, she basically is in the same social position as a menopausal woman. She is no longer a childbearer. And so that's what I labeled social menopause. And what interested me in that category is, are there opportunities, especially for religious expression, that socially menopausal women and biologically menopausal women have that childbearing women do not have? And my answer was yes.
And what is that unique position that menopausal women have?
Well, one of the things we know, we find it in the biblical text in Leviticus 12, where a woman who has borne a child is restricted from going into sacred space for 40 days after giving birth if the child is a boy child, and for 80 days after birth if the child is a girl child. And there are good parallels for this, not necessarily with exactly the same time periods or whatever, but there are good parallels for this across the ancient Near East. In later days in Mesopotamian history, it was a 30-day period where a woman was restricted from going into sacred space. Earlier in Mesopotamia, it was a 10-day period. So there's in Hittite tradition, it's either a 3-month period or a 4-month period, depending on whether you had a boy child or a girl child. So there's good parallels for this across the ancient Near East. Is essentially women post childbirth cannot go into sacred space. But what if women aren't childbearers? All of a sudden, they have much greater access on a regular and routine basis to accessing sacred space. And so I argued that it's no coincidence that the 2 times in the Hebrew Bible that we get descriptions of women making a cultic image or a religious statue, those women are widows.
Right.
Oh, interesting. Oh, what are the 2 times that
So time number 1 is in Judges chapter 17. It's the mother of Micah, but Micah's father is nowhere to be seen. Micah, the son, is the head of the household, and the mother is living in his household. So the text doesn't say this explicitly, but the only way really to explain that demographic is that her husband is dead. So she's widowed. And the other is in the book of 1 Kings, chapter 13, where Ma'akah, the mother of King Asa, makes a religious image of the goddess Asherah.
Interesting. So that kind of social menopause gives women more access to the sacred.
Yes.
Okay.
And especially to sacred space. So if you're going to make a religious image, you have to put it somewhere. You don't just put that in, I don't know, the bathroom or whatever. Right. It needs to go in a shrine. And presumably if you've made it, you're vested in it. You would like to go visit it. You'd like to make offerings. You'd like to bring libations or burn incense in front of it or whatever rituals you might like to enact. And again, if you're 80 days after, 79 days after childbirth, for those 79 days, you couldn't have done that. And
True. Very true. Why do you think there's a difference between the time of uncleanness for having a male child versus a female?
because of liminality. So
I'll come back
that was the argument I wanted to make in the book. One of the features of liminality is that because you're between statuses, so you're without status, because you don't have status A that you've left behind, and you haven't taken on status B that you're moving your way towards. You're not single, you're not married, you're nothing, right? You're not a student, you're not a graduate. You're stuck in between. You don't have a status. And that's a disempowering place to be. That's a marginalized place to be. But in a society where that is a male-dominated society, a patriarchal society, women are always, to a certain extent, in a marginalized and a disempowered place. They're always, to a certain extent, liminal. So when women go through a life cycle ritual, the only way to get them into the liminal phase of a life cycle ritual, if they're to a certain extent always liminal, is to make them even more liminal. And we see this even in traditional parts of our own culture, right? Who wears a veil during a wedding ceremony? A woman, because she becomes even more marginalized to the extent that she's unidentifiable. You can't see her face. Her identity is so taken away from her that she's really made into a unidentifiable, marginalized, extra hyperliminal, if you will, person, much more so than the groom, whose face you always see, right? And he gets to wear kind of more normal clothing. She's in a very long white, well, typically, again, historically, in a very long white dress that sort of covers almost all features of her body, right? She's very masked. She's very hidden. There's a lot of markers there that she is so without any status that we don't even know who she is as a person. She looks like every other bride to a certain extent. So women, my point being that women, when they go through a rite of passage, because they start out already as marginal figures in a male-dominated society, have to be ultra-marginalized. And one way you do that is to put a veil on them and a kind of nondescript white dress that masks their bodies. But another way you do that is make them endure longer periods of marginality. So a boy child, 40 days, a girl child, 80 days.
That is fascinating. I love that. I have a follow-up question for you.
Okay.
And it's a little bit more personal and it's not on the list. And so if you're like, I'm not comfortable with that,
we can get it out.
We can move on. But you have been in this field for a long time now, and it's a male-dominated field. Biblical studies just is. And in fact, you've existed in these very male-dominated spaces. With like Dartmouth only just becoming co-ed, and then I'm sure Harvard was too, so on and so forth. So I'm curious about the ways in which you've experienced that liminality, even within your own career.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I would say maybe both at Dartmouth and Harvard, particularly so at Harvard. Of my too many books, there's only one that's not explicitly about either issues of women or more generally issues of sexuality. And that's the book that was originally my doctoral dissertation.
Right.
And That's because, I didn't even think of it at the time, really, but in hindsight, I've certainly thought about the fact that Harvard was not a place where what was then the really newly emerging field of feminist biblical scholarship. So I arrived at Harvard in 1980. If you think of some of the iconic text of early feminist biblical scholarship, they are Phyllis Tribble's Depatriarchalizing in Biblical Interpretation article from 1973, Phyllis Bird, Images of Women in the Old Testament from 1973, Tribble's God in the Rhetoric of Sexuality from 1978, Carol Meyer's Roots of Restriction of Women in Ancient Israel or Early Israel, which I think is 76 or 77, somewhere around there. So that field was just emerging. I've really just listed the entire bibliography of feminist biblical scholarship from the 1970s for you. That field was just emerging, and at Harvard they could have cared less. So, and here's an example. Again, I've only very recently thought about, but in 1982, Phyllis Tribble came to speak at Harvard, and she gave as a talk a talk that eventually became one of the chapters in her 1984 book, Text of Terror. So she was not brought to speak by the Harvard Divinity School. She was not brought to speak by the Harvard Department of Near Eastern Languages and Civilizations or the program in Biblical History and Semitic Philology. She was brought by some component of the undergraduate college. I, to this day, don't really know what it was, but she spoke in a venue at the undergraduate college, not in the divinity school, not for the biblical students who were doing PhD in Bible. She spoke, and only one of my Bible professors showed up.
Oh my gosh.
Phyllis Tribble.
Yeah. That's remarkable.
I hope they regretted that decision.
I hope they did too.
Wow.
So part of what I'm hearing from you is, at least during your time at Harvard, there wasn't really space for you to, I don't know, examine women's lives. And it wasn't until later, after you completed your PhD, that you really started to dig into women's lives, but particularly Israelite women's lives. And so I'm curious, why? I mean, you don't have to make the case to me necessarily, but make the case, why should we care about Israelite women's lives?
Well, this question, since you've made clear to your audience, there is a list of questions that I got in advance. This question was on your list, and I have to say, when I read it on the list, my first reaction is, why are you even asking? Well, of course we should care about women. They're 50% of the population. Shouldn't we care? So I had to struggle a little bit to think, well, isn't this just obvious? Isn't it a given that we should care about women's lives? But I think the reason we should care is the Bible is a product. The Hebrew Bible is a product of the polities of ancient Israel, the northern kingdom of ancient Israel called Israel, and the southern kingdom of ancient Israel called Judah. And the Hebrew Bible is a product of those polities. But it overwhelmingly reflects the point of view, first, of the southern kingdom of Judah versus the northern kingdom of Israel. Most of the documents in the Hebrew Bible come from a Judahite perspective. It overwhelmingly expresses the view of urban populations. Most of what we have about ancient Judah is about Jerusalem, especially. It overwhelmingly expresses the view of men. In my opinion, there's not a single text in the Hebrew Bible that is authored by a woman. And it overwhelmingly expresses the view of men who are elites within ancient Israelite society. Either they're religious elites, priests, they're royal elites, kings, or they are religious. They're religious elites. I should have included priests and prophets, right? So it overwhelmingly expresses the view of male elites. So even though it's a document that comes from ancient Israel, it doesn't reflect by a long shot the multiplicity of the world, the cultural diversity of ancient Israel. And one of the points of cultural diversity it doesn't reflect is women. Yet it assumes you know that larger ancient Israelite world. So there's often just these allusions in there that speak to that larger ancient Israelite world that it assumes you know, even though it's not telling you that explicitly, because it's so worried about explicitly telling you what the priests think you should be doing on any given sacrificial occasion or something like that. So to understand the Bible, in the same way, I think reading a modern novelist is not going to explain to you every aspect of culture in the United States, but the novelist is going to assume that if you refer to, let's do a very modern thing, texting someone, that you'll know what that means. And the Bible assumes that too. It assumes you know the larger culture. And so if we really want to be very good readers of the Bible, we need to know that larger culture. And women are 50% of that larger culture. So they're worth knowing about.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds to me like if you want to know the Bible well, you need to know about women. But they come up so infrequently in the Hebrew Bible. And so what sources do you use to get to know about the lives of Israelite women?
So for me, and I keep saying I only thought about this recently. I thought about this recently because I was asked, it's been a tremendously flattering thing to be asked. I was asked to write an essay for a collection of book reviews where the each essay was going to be senior scholars review their first book. So you go back, for me, 40 years after the fact, and review your first book. And my first book was the book that was originally my dissertation and became a book. So I was kind of astonished. I went back and read it, which was painful. But I was kind of astonished to find in the introduction of that book that I said the three major sources for understanding any aspect of ancient Israelite religion are the Bible, archaeology, both the archaeology of the territory that was controlled by the ancient Israelites, but also the archaeology of the surrounding polities and the larger biblical world, and comparative textual and iconographic evidence from the larger biblical world. Some Mesopotamian text, Egyptian text, Greek text, Hittite text. And I said that in 1987, and if Cynthia would open the introduction of the book she's holding that I wrote in 2025, it says exactly the same thing. And I didn't even, I didn't even look back. I've held those, I was astonished to learn I'd held those three precepts for my entire career. Even I didn't know that I had been so consistent about that. I will say that said, and this was in the first book, and again, it kind of astonished me to find that I was thinking that already. I have been quite determined that for the kinds of things I'm interested in, you need to read the Bible in a way maybe differently than we're standardly trained to read it. And the two phrases I've used to describe that most commonly are first, you need to read between the lines, and second, you need to read against the grain. So against the grain is a little bit easier to illustrate. The Bible, those priests, those prophets especially, have extremely strong feelings about what is the right way to practice ancient Israelite religion and what is the wrong way to practice ancient Israelite religion. But the fact that they are telling you so constantly, you shouldn't be doing this, you shouldn't be doing this, you shouldn't be doing this, means that people are doing it. Right?
Mm-hmm.
You don't need to go into histrionic rants about this is wrong, 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 unless it's really happening. That people are doing it. And I think we have to assume that people are doing it because they find it religiously meaningful and religiously beneficial. I don't think anyone gets up in the morning who identifies as religious and says, I'm going to do something really heretical today. I think people get up and do what they think is religiously appropriate. And so reading against the grain is to take that seriously, is to say, I can read these prophetic condemnations of, let's say, or let's take a priestly one. I can read these priestly condemnations of the Queen Mother Ma'akah making a statue of the goddess Asherah, but I don't have to accept that we should condemn it. I can read it against the grain to say this must have been a meaningful religious act for her, and then turn to ask, why is it meaningful?
Yeah.
And that's been a very important reading strategy for me.
That's a great one. So that kind of leads me to this question. You've done, a lot of work on Israelite religion, obviously, and you've also talked about women in ancient Israelite religions. And so I'm wondering what kind of misconceptions about women in ancient Israelite religions do we have about women in that role, and what kind of strategies do you use, or what do you do to kind of combat those misconceptions?
Mm-hmm. So I just told you a big one. I think one of our misconceptions is we tend to agree with the biblical writers, and if they say it's wrong, we tend to say it's wrong. But I much prefer, as someone who thinks of myself as a historian of ancient Israelite religion, to say, I'm not in the business of making value judgments about what these people were doing 2,500 years ago. I'm in the business of trying to describe what they were doing 2,500 years ago and trying to say why they might have been doing it. So again, I think a big misconception for me is to trust the biblical writers too much, or to take their opinion as the opinion we also need to hold. And I've worked a lot at trying to undermine that, again, by this kind of reading against the grain. I think another misconception that's a little bit more subtle is to assume that when we look for women's participation in the religious life of ancient Israel, which is what I'm most interested in, we should look for analogs to male religious life. And I've been guilty of this trap. So I have published on women who are identified in the Bible as prophets, right? And say, okay, that's a major religious role in ancient Israel. We know a lot of men who were prophets. And so when we start looking for women who were religiously active in ancient Israel, we should look for women who do the same thing that men do. So we should look for these female prophets. And I've done that. I've published on Deborah, I've published on Miriam, I've published on these women prophets. And I don't regret those publications. I'm not gonna consign them to the trash bin. But I have become more concerned with thinking about women's religious lives not needing to happen parallel with or in the same way as men's religious lives. And I've been the great beneficiary here of work that Cynthia, you're a pioneer in, which is people who do archaeology of the household in ancient Israel and think
I
about.
can die a happy woman. Susan Ackerman has made my life.
But think about and the house you've worked on in Le Havre is a great example, right? But think about religious activities that go on in the household, and think about how the household is a much more natural a place for women's religious lives to happen than is, let's say, the great state temple in Jerusalem. And that's not to say that women couldn't go to the temple in Jerusalem as long as they weren't impure from having had a child. but that it's much more natural to think about women's religious lives in the household. Here's an example from the book of 1 Samuel, from 1 Samuel chapter 1, which is the story of Hannah, who is barren, but eventually bears her miracle son, Samuel. And we're told in that story that Hannah's husband Elkanah and her larger family go every year to the sanctuary in Shiloh, which seems to be about a day's journey from their house. So it's not the great big temple in Jerusalem, which doesn't even exist at this time. But they're leaving home to go to what we might think of as a regional sanctuary in Shiloh. And the story tells us they do this every year. But then Hannah becomes pregnant against all odds. And she has vowed that she is going to give that child, her son, Samuel, over to God's service at Shiloh. And her husband agrees, and she says only that she is going to wait until the child is weaned. Well, we know, because we've read our comparative sources from ancient Mesopotamia and ancient Egypt, that children nursed in the ancient world for 3 years.
Yeah.
So Hannah's not going to go to Shiloh in year 1 when she's nursing. She's not going to go to Shiloh in year 2. And she maybe is by year 3 ready to go to Shiloh. So what's she going to do in terms of venues of religious expression in year 1 or year 2? The household is the place that's available to her.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I would fully agree with that. And how the household being this, not only the stage where everyday life occurs, but the stage where it is the focus of their own lives. So how much more important would that be to them to conduct these rituals, these, religious rituals, or even kind of every other day activities, that's the space for them. That's their primary space. Well, that's just great. Thank you so much.
So again, and my point being, what I've tried to become more sensitive to in thinking about women's religious lives is not just looking, how are women doing what men do, right, like being prophets occasionally, but what are women doing that is their religious self-expression that isn't necessarily the same thing men are doing.
Right.
Do we have any indicators of that other than, the women making the idols in the Hebrew Bible? But I'm thinking about, like, for both of you, I guess, what did that kind of religious life look like for women within the household?
So kind of curiously, one of our best indicators is again, shows up to us in a text where we really have to read against the grain. It's Jeremiah chapter 7, verses 16 through 20. And in Jeremiah chapter 7, verses 16 through 20, Jeremiah, the prophet, the male prophet, is railing against, and all of chapter 7 is a rant, and chapter 8 too, and chapter 9 and 10, and that's Jeremiah. But He's railing against religious practices that are going on, in this case in Jerusalem, that he thinks are inappropriate. And in Jeremiah 7:16-20, his particular rant is against the worship of a goddess who we're not told particularly her name. We're only told that she's called the Queen of Heaven. And Jeremiah actually tells us what evil things are being done in terms of worshiping the Queen of Heaven. What's going on in the households in Jerusalem is the sons gather wood, the fathers kindle fire, and the women make offering cakes for the Queen of Heaven. So I think that text pretty much tells us one of the things we have to envision is a household setting where cooking takes place, and that's cooking that's just going to get meals on the table, right? But also where you take care of feeding the deities who are important to your household. And this household, these households that Jeremiah is ranting about, have decided a deity important to them is the Queen of Heaven. And Jeremiah pretty much tells us, well, what do you do? Yeah. You the same way you would bake for your family, you bake cakes to make as offerings to her. And elsewhere in Jeremiah 44, he tells us that these women pour out libations to the Queen of Heaven and that they burn incense to her. I think that's a pretty good picture of what would go on in a small household shrine.
I agree.
Sounds like it. It really does. I mean, I've thought about that passage before, but I've never really thought about women's roles. I've not read against the grain when I'm reading Jeremiah 7, and I'm just like, yeah, darn it, they shouldn't be making those cakes. You hate to see it. But I love that. I love just kind of like exploring that imaginative territory of like, oh, what would it have looked like? Yeah, that's great. This question is pretty similar to the one that I asked already. But I'm curious about your experiences in biblical studies, being a woman. Do you ever get feedback from people like, oh, Susan, you're writing about women again? Like, does that ever happen to you? Or what has it been like to write so much about women and to be a woman in this field?
I have gotten that feedback. So one of the very early articles I published on about women was the article that I cited some material from earlier in our conversation about queen mothers in ancient Israel. So the mother of a son who has become the king. So the mother of the reigning king. And that article was called The Queen Mother in the Cult in Ancient Israel. And it basically looked at queen mothers as Asherah worshipers. And I published it in 1993. I would tell you, and in the lead journal in biblical studies, in the Journal of Biblical Literature, and I would tell you to this day that I stand by the article and that I think the article is a evidence-based, carefully reasoned argument. But one of my best friends in biblical studies who had been in graduate school with me after it came out told me it was too feminist. Oh. And I was really surprised, which is why I remember that 23 years later. It's like, really?
It's not.
I will say on the flip side, I have sometimes said about myself when people ask me to present at a conference or something like that, and I'll say, well, it's just going to be more women. And I have had someone say back to me, which made me really happy, say, with you, that's never really what it is. It's all this Egyptian material we didn't know. It's all this Mesopotamian material we didn't know. It's this Greek material we didn't know. It's this archaeological material we didn't know. It's all of a synthesis that you've pulled together. And yes, you may pull it together because you want to talk about women, but it's like this encyclopedic exploration of, I don't know, childbirth rituals or something like that. And yes, that's exactly what we want for our conference. And so that made me very happy. I was like, oh,
That's
okay.
great. Yeah, when I've explained your work to people, more people kind of outside of our field, or maybe people who aren't in our field at all, and I say, if you want the details, you've got to go to Susan, because Susan just has it all, and she just pulls it all together so nicely. And all the different evidences for the different cultures, the archaeology, everything that you were saying was important to you, you do, and you pull it together, and it's so detailed. And there's your arguments. There's no flaw. There's no,
Well, I'm sure
you would
flaws.
probably beg to differ, I'm sure, but your argument is so well researched and well thought out, and you provide all that research. So it's very clear to your readers, okay, she's really thought about this and has done her due diligence on this. So that's, my fangirling for the moment.
100%. I do want to make sure to name that there's a sense in which you almost have to justify the work that you do because it's focused on women, and you have to add into that, oh no, don't worry, Susan's going to do really good work. And if we were talking about men, I don't think we would have to say that.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, that's true.
So it's amazing. You do amazing work on the one hand, and on the other hand, you shouldn't have to justify the interests that you have.
True.
So I'll just say it.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Well, I have one last question, which will be a short question, but one of the things that some of the stuff that you said, we asked you about, the misconceptions and why study women. And I think, of course, with us, that's something we're interested in, but I'm thinking about, the wider audience that is hopefully listening to this, and coming from, a Protestant background that I come from, and our current political climate, which seems like, women and women's rights and women's agency and authority and power is all under siege right now. And a lot of people are using, as they have for forever, but it seems like we're seeing a resurgence in using the biblical text to not be supportive of women, to kind of degrade women. And so when I think about why study women, to us, it seems like an obvious question. Well, yeah, you should study women. This is an important thing. But then I think about some of the stuff I hear, and maybe I'm listening to the news too much, or maybe I'm, on other things too much, but where it seems like, no, we need to get more of this out there, that this is important, especially with everything that's going on. So
I'm not teaching anymore, but one of the mantras I used to insist to my students was that they had to have internalized by the end of any class was, there is no such thing as the Bible says. By which I meant those kinds of common and proclamations that we often hear in our world. Well, the Bible says, whatever it says, abortion is wrong. The Bible says women should be subservient to their husbands. The Bible says this. The Bible says that. The Bible says homosexuality is wrong. The Bible, just the Hebrew Bible, is a document that was written, at least in my estimate, with texts that span 1,000 years by a multiplicity of authors. We would be naive to think that over 1,000 years, the multiplicity of authors would all speak with a monolithic voice. The Bible says a lot of different things in a lot of different places. And that kind of cherry picking to essentially find the policy that you want because you've found the proof verse that says that is it drives me crazy because the contradictory verse is just a few pages away.
Yeah, and you got to keep reading.
Yeah. And you got to read hard. It's not an easy book to read.
I love that. Well, I think, Anna, we've got a few mantras that we can start adding into our classes. The reading against the grain, you got to get rid of the Bible says type of thing. I love that. That's fantastic.
Yeah, this is going to be great. I'll add it I'm going to put it in my syllabus, man.
Yes. They don't read the syllabi. You got to
No,
put
that's
it.
true.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Susan, my last question for you. I know you just published a book. I'm going to show it here for everybody to see. So
it's blue.
It's blue and it's beautiful. And
it's got a statue on it that's pregnant.
It's got a figurine. Yeah, for sure.
It unfortunately is not Israelite. It's Phoenician, but it's from Dor, which is on the coast of modern day Israel. So
it works.
I decided it was close enough. It had to do.
So I would imagine, that you are either, maybe you're taking a break from working on something, which would be, rightfully so after just publishing such a big book. Or are you working on something? And if you are you able to, just tell us a little bit about it? Or is it a top secret thing? Or
no, it's not top secret. So yes, I'm working on something. Is one of the great joys actually of being retired is that I have time to work on projects that have been sitting on the back burner for years and years and years and years. So I'm trying to pull together a book where I wrote the first article related to it back in 2010. So that's how long it's been sitting on the back burner. But it's actually not explicitly about women, but it came out of some work about women, so it's still connected. But it's on how do you get rid of demons in ancient Israel? So my presumption is that the ancient world, whether it's Mesopotamia or Egypt or Israel or wherever, that they understood their cosmos as having multiple supernatural beings, including demons. Demons in particular are often seen as responsible for illnesses, for example, because they don't have an etiology of disease caused by germs or whatever. They don't have that science, right? So I'm assuming that there's a cosmos that is full of supernatural beings that includes demons. In ancient Israel, as opposed to Mesopotamia and Egypt, where they have large professional classes of magicians and physicians and exorcists to deal with this problem, we don't have much evidence of that in Israel, which makes sense. It's a much less cosmopolitan society. It's a much poorer society. It's a much more rural society. So it makes sense we don't have that professional class. So there's a lot of DIY, how you get rid of demons, I think, or just what can you do as sort of home remedies to get rid of demons. And I'm particularly interested in the fact that demons seem to have are sort of hypersensitive when it comes to things like hearing and like smell and like brightness or light. So the book is called Drumming Away Demons because one of its presumptions is if you make a lot of loud noise, you can scare away demons by making lots of loud noises, and you don't need a professional to do that for you. You can just bang on things and get rid of demons. But I'm also interested in the way you might use flashes of lights to get rid of demons. So the women at the entrance to the tent of meeting in Exodus 38:8 who have mirrors, are they using their mirrors to either shine bright lights in demons' eyes so demons won't come into God's sacred space? Or are they holding up mirrors so demons will see how ugly they are and run away screaming? I'm not quite sure. But I'm interested in the way you can prey on demons' sight as a way of scaring away demons. You can prey on demons' sensitive hearing. And you can also prey on demons' sense of smell, or at least that's my hypothesis. So I'm very interested, for example, the excavators at Tel Beit Abel Ma'akah have identified a sacred area that has within it a couple of staghorns, deer horns.
Yeah.
Well, why would you have that? Well, it's quite interesting that there's a lot of that good comparative material from ancient Egypt and ancient Mesopotamia that suggests that to drive demons away, you burn ground up staghorn, and that's because it stinks.
Yes.
Roman women used it. Roman women in brothels, Roman women who worked in brothels, used it to drive away serpents from the brothels because it stinks.
Wow.
So that's what I'm interested in.
Wow. You learn something new every day.
I love that.
Well, one of the
example
bizarre things about writing this book is, especially, I've been working on the smell part right now, and there are not a lot of ancient sources that tell you this smells good or this smells bad. And so I find all these lists of these things that you burn when a demon is around, but I don't really know how they smell. So I've been conducting a lot of home experiments.
Yes. That sounds like so much fun.
Yeah, I
love
can
that.
tell you that onion skins smell really pungent and acrid when they burn, and they really sting your nose, for example.
Oh, I bet.
Are you doing these outside?
The onion skins I did on the kitchen stove, actually.
Nice.
Wow. Well, Susan, what a joy it's been to talk with you. And, for me personally, it's just such a privilege because you have done, we've talked about how prolific your work is and how important it is. But one of the things that we like to do here is just to say thank you to these women scholars who have really just done such amazing work and have impacted our own work in so many ways. And I hope you at least get a little bit of a sense of how much we appreciate you and the impact that you have made on all of us. So thank you.
Well, thank you. So I do have a question in return. So is it only the host of the program who are divas, or are the guest divas as well?
Oh, you are such a diva. You have been, yes, you are the OG diva. Like you started the
that's
diva.
what I needed to know.
We're
just
using it
following
in
your
the
footsteps.
positive connotation, not the negative connotation that has taken over the terminology.
I want to be a diva.
Well, you are.
You definitely are.
I love that so much. That's so great. Well, thank you so much, Susan. We really appreciate your time. And thank you, everybody, for listening. If you appreciated and liked our conversation with Susan, please make sure you subscribe, like, and share on your socials. Until next time.
This has been another change-making conversation from Baptist News Global. The episode you've just heard is part of a special podcast series called Bible Divas. Be sure to follow BNG daily at baptistnews.com and subscribe to get notifications about future episodes. Baptist News Global is a national nonprofit news service that is independent, free, and faithful. BNG is supported by readers and listeners like you. Learn more at baptistnews.com.
This episode was produced and edited by Mac Bowles of TKG Communications, LLC, Dallas, Texas.